From Forest Child to Queen of Hearts, a spiritual story of karma, forgiveness, and light. The sky was as gray as the heart of a woman who had forgotten how to show mercy. The wind swept through the brittle branches, carrying with it the mournful cries of the ancient forest, a place where darkness belonged not only to nature but also mirrored the darkness within human hearts. In a remote village, there lived a gentle farmer named Arjun, who had spent more than 10 years with his wife without being blessed with a child. People looked at him with pity, and over time, his wife's gentle demeanor turned bitter. The long wait for a child had drained her compassion dry. One day, Arjun decided to take a second wife, a kind-hearted woman named Leela. Fortune smiled upon them, and Leela became pregnant just a few months after the wedding. On a misty winter morning, a baby girl was born, her skin as white as milk, her hair black as ebony, like a small piece of the moon descended to earth. Arjun held the child close and named her Pari, meaning little angel. But there was one person who did not see the child as an angel, rather, as a curse. The first wife, Durga, sat brooding in the dark corner of the kitchen, her eyes like molten stones filled with resentment. Since Pari's birth, her husband had paid her little attention. The love she once received now flowed entirely toward the little being who could smile and call out Papa in a babbling voice. The more she heard that tender Papa, the tighter Durga's chest constricted, like barbed wire wrapped around her heart. One day, when Leela was away at the market and Arjun was toiling in the distant fields, Durga approached the wooden cradle. Pari was asleep, traces of milk still at the corners of her mouth. Durga lifted the baby, her hands trembling, not from affection, but from the crime she was about to commit. If she's gone, maybe everything will return to how it was. My husband will have only one wife again, and there will be no one else to steal his love. Without hesitation, Durga crept through the dense woods, carrying the baby to a place she believed no one would ever find. The ancient forest was thick with tangled trees and no clear paths, only the howling wind, the cries of owls, and strange rustlings in the underbrush. Durga laid the baby down among a bed of rotting leaves, beneath an old mahogany tree. She spoke no farewell, gave no backward glance. She turned and walked away, leaving the fragile infant to the cold and darkness. If you're still watching this video and feel outraged by Durga's evil deed, please comment the number 2 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I encourage you to do so and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any future stories. Your support helps us continue creating inspiring content for you. Pari stirred. She woke to an unfamiliar world. There was no familiar scent of her mother, no lullaby. Only the damp smell of the forest and the bitter wind whispering in her ears. She cried out. Not an ordinary cry, but a plea for help. A prayer from a soul that had not yet learned to speak. They say children are the incarnation of the Buddhas, because they know neither hatred nor deceit, only love and the yearning for an embrace. In the very moment humanity abandoned Pari, nature reached out to save her. A female monkey, living with a hermit in a small forest shrine, heard the distant wailing. Leaving her own young clinging to the trees, she leapt from shadow to shadow, moving toward the faint glow of moonlight, toward Pari. The monkey looked down at the crying infant, her tiny face flushed from cold and hunger. A strange moment passed. The monkey gazed at Pari as if seeing a child she had once lost. She gently picked up the baby and dripped water from a cracked coconut tree into her mouth. Pari stopped crying. That night, Pari was held in the warmest embrace, from a creature that could not speak human words, but carried the heart of a mother. She slept peacefully for the first time, wrapped in the soft, furry arms that kept her safe. Perhaps in the heavenly realms, the celestial beings smiled. In a world where humans could abandon one another, a monkey became a mother. Such irony did not destroy the world, it deepened it. As the first rays of sunlight pierced through the thick canopy, shining down onto the tattered roof of a small hut by the forest's edge, another story began to unfold. That morning, Mahadeva, a hermit who had lived in seclusion for many years, returned after 3 days of alms rounds in distant villages. He walked slowly, carrying a worn cloth bag over one shoulder, and a begging bowl filled with a few boiled yams, some salt, and a bunch of wild bananas. But he stopped in his tracks when he saw Bandari, the mother monkey, sitting quietly in front of his hut with a human baby in her arms. She wasn't leaping about as usual, but sitting still, her gaze calm and tender like that of a merciful mother. The hermit froze. "Where did you find this little one, Bandari?" he asked, his voice soft like the wind stirring his prayer beads. The monkey looked at him, then gently placed the baby into his hands, as if handing over a piece of her heart. The baby neither cried nor trembled. Her wide eyes stared into the sage's face, eyes too young to know sorrow, but old enough to have faced death. The hermit looked up to the heavens. Tears welled in his eyes. "Humans cast you away like trash, but nature did not. I understand now. I will raise you," he whispered. From that day forward, the little girl was named Ujjala, meaning light, for her skin was as pure and radiant as a beam of light. Bandari cared for Ujjala as if she were her own child. She fed her the juice of wild fruits, stroked her hair, and cradled her through the cold nights. Meanwhile, Mahadeva taught her to chant mantras, to draw sand mandalas on the ground, and to meditate beneath ancient trees. Ujjala grew up in the heart of the forest, but she was not wild. Her heart overflowed with kindness. She learned to speak by listening to Mahadeva's ancient chants. She learned to love by observing Bandari, who sacrificed the best fruits for her. "I don't need to know who gave birth to you," Mahadeva once told her when she was 4. "I only need to know that you are the embodiment of a light once abandoned but never extinguished." 5 years passed. Ujjala could now gather firewood, light a fire, carry water from the stream, and cook meals for the 3 of them. She learned quickly, and sometimes she meditated beside Bandari, a rare sight, human and beast in harmony, like a silent bodhisattva in the form of an animal. Each morning, before sunrise, Mahadeva would wake Ujjala with the sound of a small bell. They would sit facing each other, legs crossed, backs straight like young bamboo shoots. Ujjala would close her eyes, her heart serene, softly whispering along with the ancient Sanskrit chants. Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhi Svaha. And in that sacred moment, the child once abandoned like refuse had become the first disciple of a hermit, and the spiritual child of the forest. One day, when Ujjala scraped her hand while fetching water, Mahadeva crushed a healing herb and applied it to her wound. He said, "You know, little one, even plants have souls. When you are hurt, they will heal you. But if you live with a wicked heart, they will refuse you. Nature only blesses those who keep their hearts pure." Ujjala nodded, her eyes lighting up, not because she fully understood, but because her heart recognized the truth. One afternoon, while gathering dry leaves around the hut, Ujjala asked, "Baba, do I have a mother?" Mahadeva fell silent for a long while. He gazed toward the distant forest, where the last light of the day faded like incense smoke. "You have not just one mother, child," he said. "You have 2. One gave you life through the body, the other gave you life through the heart. And your mother, Bandari, has never let you lack for love. Ujjala stood still, then moved closer and embraced Bandari's neck. The monkey sat quietly, gently stroking the girl's hair, as if it were a sacred ceremony. Motherhood, sometimes it needs no words, no blood ties. It only needs to stay, when the world has turned its back. Ujjala's childhood flowed like a pure stream deep within the forest, where the trees offered shade and the chants of ancient prayers rose and fell like the breath of the earth and sky. But like all children who grow, she began to wonder what lay beyond. One afternoon, after completing their morning rituals, Mahadeva called Ujjala over. He placed his aged hand gently on her head. "I must journey far for a few days. There's a great offering festival in the lowlands, and I must attend. While I am gone, you must not leave the hermitage. You have grown, but the world beyond is still filled with many dangers." Ujjala nodded obediently. But deep inside her, a tiny sprout of curiosity had begun to grow. For the first time in her life, she would be left alone, with only Bandari and the forest for company. The first 3 days passed peacefully. Ujjala tended to Bandari, played with the baby monkeys, kindled fires for cooking, and recited the sacred mantras from memory. She began to feel that she had truly grown up. That she no longer needed someone to hold her hand. Until the fourth evening. After cooking dinner, she set the meal on the wooden table as usual, placing a portion of ripe fruit for Bandari. But suddenly, one of the mischievous little monkeys leapt onto the table and toppled the pot of hot soup. Uncooked rice scattered all over the ground. The fire was snuffed out. The woodpile was already empty. Ujjala jumped up and scolded softly. "What are you doing? Can't you even let us have a peaceful meal?" The little monkey fled in fear. But the troubles didn't end there. The sky darkened. The summer night rain was coming. No fire. No rice left to cook. Bandari let out a soft cry and tugged at Ujjala's sleeve. "Mother wants me to go outside to seek fire." Ujjala looked up. The clouds heaved like tired breaths. She knew she was forbidden to leave, Mahadeva had warned her. But then, Bandari's pleading eyes, the rumbling stomachs, and the cold wind beginning to seep into the hermitage. Sometimes, great decisions are born not from grand ambitions, but from a small moment of wanting to do the right thing. And sometimes, doing the right thing leads us straight into danger. She stepped beyond the hermitage gates, for the first time in years. If you are still watching this video and praying for Ujjala's safe journey, please comment the number 8 below to let me know you are here. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you won't miss any future videos. Your support helps us continue creating inspiring stories for you. The forest air outside was colder and stranger than she had imagined. She headed west, where faint trails and signs of human life could be seen in the distance. After trudging up a thorny hill, Ujjala saw smoke, thin and ghost-like, rising beyond the trees. A small, low hut was tucked under a banyan tree. Inside sat an old crone, hunched and hollow-eyed, warming her hands by a bright fire. A smell hung in the air, something warm but unsettling, the scent of ancient tales and hidden traps. "Little girl, why wander alone through the woods at night?" the old woman cackled, her yellow teeth glinting, her eyes like bottomless wells. Ujjala bowed respectfully. "Grandmother, I only ask for a little fire. My home is far away, and today our fire has died. My mother is hungry." "Oh, what a good child you are. But alas, I am old and frail. If you help me grind some grain, I'll give you not just a spark, but a whole torch," she said, grinning wide. Ujjala hesitated, then agreed. She began grinding barley with her slender, strong arms, honed from years of forest living. Sweat beaded on her forehead. The old woman watched, smiling, but not with kindness, with hunger. Not hunger for food. Hunger for pure souls. Some creatures feed on the life force of the innocent. After she finished, Ujjala wiped her hands and said politely, "Grandmother, I have finished. May I have the fire now?" The old woman nodded and handed her a smoldering torch. Then, she pulled a small pouch of strange seeds from her robe, seeds that gleamed golden like dried blood. "Scatter these along your path home, they are forest blessing seeds. They will help you find your way back." Ujjala thanked her, accepted the seeds, and hurried off, a faint uneasiness rising in her chest. Above her, the sky blazed red, no longer the gentle light of sunset, but an omen. Ujjala returned safely to the hermitage. She cooked rice, fed Bandari, and sat quietly in meditation. But elsewhere, in the awakening darkness, another creature had caught her scent. A demon, part man, part beast, with a wolf's nose sharper than any hound's, slinked back toward the old crone's hut. "Mother! I smell it, the pure human flesh. Who came here?" The old witch licked her cracked lips and chuckled. "A girl, pure as a lotus. But you came too late. I only managed to give her a trail to follow. Track her. And remember, her heart, you must not devour. It belongs to something far greater." That night, Ujjala could not sleep. Not from fear, but because something had shifted in the air. She sat before the tiny altar in the hermitage, where a rough stone statue of Shiva, carved by Mahadeva himself, stood watch. The oil lamp flickered. The flame danced, not dying, but shivering, like a heartbeat before a cry. Bandari sat nearby, clutching her babies, her gaze never leaving Ujjala. And in the deep forest, a strange sound crept among the branches. Not the wind. Not the insects. A heavy, dragging breath, as if the earth itself struggled to breathe. The demon, the witch's son, followed the trail of blood seeds the crone had given Ujjala. His eyes glowed red as fire. His nose twitched like a wolf's. His nails curled like a panther's claws. And his heart knew no mercy. He was neither man nor beast. He was the spawn of evil, fed by blood and dark magic. As he approached the hermitage, he stopped. A faint shimmer surrounded the hut, a protective barrier crafted by Mahadeva. He growled. "The hermit's shield. I cannot break it. But, if I can lure the girl outside." He changed his tone, from a growl to a gentle, fatherly voice. "Ujjala, open the door. Baba is home. I brought you honey and wild cakes you love." Inside, Bandari leapt up. She let out a roar, not a monkey's screech, but a deep, thunderous warning. Ujjala startled, but then shook her head firmly. "That's not Baba. He wouldn't return so soon, and that voice, it's cold." She crept toward the door but did not open it, only peeking through a crack. Two red eyes pressed against the door, human yet bottomless. Ujjala stepped back. "You are not human." The creature laughed, a cruel, splintering sound. "I am no human, but I know the taste of pure blood. You are the forest's gift. I have come to begin the feast." He slammed against the door. But the door, forged from sacred steel by Mahadeva, did not budge. Another slam. Crack. One of his claws broke, wedged in the doorframe. The demon howled in pain and retreated into the night, but left behind the stink of blood and broken evil. The next morning, Ujjala opened the door. The earth was scarred with dark, clawed footprints. And there, stuck in the doorframe, a broken claw, sharp and sinister. She picked it up, and immediately flinched. A tiny scratch bled on her finger, but the blood was not red. It was tinged faintly with purple. Within minutes, Ujjala's body burned with fever. Her heart pounded. Her vision blurred. Bandari screamed, tearing the scarf from her head, trying to pull her toward the forest pond. Ujjala managed to whisper, "Mother, save me," then collapsed. Bandari clutched her like her own child, howling until her voice cracked. The forest itself held its breath. Just then, a royal hunting party, led by a young king named Aryan, barely 30, sharp-eyed as a sword, passed nearby. Hearing the cries, Aryan raised his hand to halt. "Something's wrong. That's no ordinary cry." They followed the sound and came upon a strange sight. A beautiful girl, unconscious in the arms of a monkey. She was unlike any village girl, unlike any forest dweller. She looked like a fallen celestial maiden. King Aryan approached, placing a hand on her chest. "She's still breathing." His gaze landed on her injured hand, where the broken claw had scratched her. Aryan's voice turned grim. "This claw, it's not from any human. It belongs to the underworld." He lifted her into his arms and ordered, "Set up camp here. Care for the girl. We won't hunt anymore. Something much greater is unfolding in this forest." Ujjala awoke in an unfamiliar place. No more thatched roof of the old hermitage. No more Mahadeva's morning chants. No more baby monkeys chattering by her ears. Only a white silk canopy embroidered with royal patterns, the faint scent of herbs, and a pair of unfamiliar eyes watching her. Those eyes were not cruel, not angry, not wicked. They shone, like a sword washed clean of blood, and warmed, like a father's hand soothing a frightened child. "You're awake," a deep, steady male voice said. Ujjala struggled to sit up. Her body ached all over, but her injured hand was carefully bandaged with a cloth softer, cooler, and safer than anything she had ever known. Beside her, Bandari, her monkey mother, lay sleeping, her arms still wrapped protectively around Ujjala's legs. The man before her, dressed like a royal warrior, did not blink as he watched her. "I am Aryan, king of Devgarh. We found you gravely wounded near the eastern woods. You had fainted. This monkey," she wept endlessly. "I thought she was your birth mother." Ujjala tried to speak, but her throat was parched. Aryan handed her a cup of water. After she drank, he asked gently, "What is your name?" A brief silence. "Ujjala," she whispered. Aryan furrowed his brows. "Light. A beautiful name, and fitting for the one who bears it." She lowered her gaze. For the first time in her life, Ujjala felt shy. Not because she was being watched, but because, for the first time, she realized she was no longer just a wild forest girl. She was a young woman. That evening, Ujjala was invited to the main tent, where the commanders and ministers gathered for a council. Aryan rose as she entered. On the table lay the broken claw that had wounded her, beside an ancient book, open to an illustration of a terrifying creature. Rakshaka, the Soul Eater. "We are facing a being that does not belong to the human world," Aryan announced. "It tracked its prey once, it may return." A general asked. "And the girl? How is she involved?" Aryan's voice hardened. "She is the victim. He then turned to Ujjala. But I must know, why would a girl raised in the forest be hunted by a spirit demon? Ujjala took a deep breath, and told her story. Piece by piece, memory by memory, like a stream breaking through its banks. From being abandoned in the woods, to being raised by the mother monkey Bandari, to meeting Mahadeva, learning to chant sacred mantras, living a life of retreat, and finally, the fateful night she stepped beyond the safety of the hermitage, seeking fire. The room fell silent. An old sage, who had traveled with the hunting party, nodded and murmured. This child is the one from the ancient prophecy. The one nature tested but who lost no humanity. It is possible, she carries a rare spiritual essence, which the dark spirits covet. Aryan looked at Ujjala once more. This time, the gaze was no longer that of a king curious about a mystery, but of a man whose heart was quietly tying itself to her fate. When the council dispersed, Aryan stayed behind with her. Ujjala, you cannot remain here long, he said gently. This forest will no longer be safe. I can take you to the capital. There, you will have hundreds of guards, hundreds of lamps keeping watch over you every night. Ujjala looked up, hesitant. But what about Bandari? My mother. She will come too, Aryan promised. There was a long pause. Then, she nodded. Not because she fully trusted yet, but because, for the first time, her heart glimpsed the promise of protection beyond the sacred forest and her mother's furry embrace. Ujjala sat silently in the silk-draped, gold-carved carriage. Outside, the horse's hooves beat steadily against the earth, and the forest receded behind her. She did not look back. Not because she didn't long to, but because she feared if she did, her heart would no longer have the strength to move forward. Bandari sat right beside her, curled tightly against her legs like a vigilant guardian of a precious treasure. The monkey's eyes were wary, yet understanding, as if she, too, knew. My daughter is crossing into another world. I lost you once to the forest. I will not let anyone steal you again, Bandari's silent gaze seemed to say. The palace of Devgar emerged from the morning mist, towering, majestic, and cold. Not cold from the weather, but from the gazes of the women within. When the carriage stopped at the outer court, the royal attendants lined up respectfully. From a distance, a woman approached, tall, elegant, dressed not in gaudy splendor but radiating undeniable authority, the current queen of Devgar. Her name was Vasundhara, Aryan's first wife, and the woman who had ruled the palace long before Ujjala ever arrived. Ujjala bowed deeply. My respects, Your Majesty. Vasundhara smiled sweetly, but her eyes did not. There's no need for formality. If you are the king's guest, you are also mine, she said. Then she turned to Aryan. His Majesty goes hunting and returns, with a celestial maiden. Truly, Devgar is blessed. Aryan merely nodded, then led Ujjala inside. That night, Ujjala was given her own residence, a small villa nestled beyond a white lotus garden, separated from the main palace. Bandari was given a room next door. Everything seemed peaceful. But in a royal court, peace is often just the paint over the door to hell. One full moon night, Ujjala was invited to a royal banquet. Candlelight flickered. The court ladies, musicians, and ministers gathered. Vasundhara sat to Aryan's left. Ujjala sat to his right. As the sarangi's melody floated through the air, their eyes met, 4 gazes, 3 people, 1 table, and the faint scent of jealousy mixed with the wine. After the banquet, Vasundhara approached Ujjala as they stood by the lotus pond, alone. You are very beautiful, Vasundhara said smoothly. But tell me honestly, how can a forest girl know how to walk, speak, and bow with such grace? Ujjala answered calmly, without resentment. My foster mother was a monkey, but my foster father was a sage. He taught me the ways of the earth, and the laws of the heavens. Vasundhara smiled, a smile sharper than a jeweler's knife. Have you ever considered that you might just be a passing beauty? A fleeting dream? A test from the gods? Ujjala remained silent. And silence was the one answer Vasundhara feared the most. Because she understood. Those without ambition are the most dangerous rivals in a palace. That night, Vasundhara retreated to her private chamber. She summoned her most trusted handmaiden. Prepare the ritual, she whispered. We shall perform the fragrant soul summoning. I want to know if the girl's fate can be replaced. The fragrant soul summoning, a forbidden ritual, used scented incense to lure the soul from the body during dreams, and interrogate it. If the soul was too weak, it could be banished or replaced. The next night, Ujjala slept peacefully in her lotus villa, unaware that a faint purple mist drifted through her window. She began to dream. In the dream, she found herself in a long, mist-filled corridor. At the end stood a woman in royal robes, her back turned. Ujjala stepped forward. A voice echoed, the woman's voice. You do not belong to this world. Return the body. Return the palace. Return him to me. Ujjala recoiled. She stepped back. But behind her, a deep, bottomless abyss. At that moment, another figure burst into the dream, Bandari, her mother, screaming, leaping across realms to seize Ujjala's hand and pull her away from the cursed hallway. A thunderous boom shook the dream. Ujjala jolted awake. The door to her chamber burst open. Outside, Vasundhara collapsed on the ground, blood dripping from her nose like a red thread. The third night watch drum sounded as frantic handmaidens rushed to report. The queen had fainted outside Ujjala's door, bleeding uncontrollably from her nose. Aryan shot out of bed like a man possessed. When he arrived, Vasundhara was being carried back to her chambers, her face pale, her lips muttering as if she had barely escaped some unseen hell. Who did this to the queen? Aryan roared. No answer. Only the wind. Inside Ujjala's room, she still sat pressed against the wall, her heart pounding. Bandari crouched protectively nearby, eyes red, as if she too had fought a silent battle. Mother, what happened? Ujjala whispered. Bandari said nothing. But Ujjala knew, something had entered her dreams last night. And something else had been cast out. The next morning, the entire palace was heavy with tension. Vasundhara lay sick in her quarters. No one dared speak of soul summoning, it was forbidden, black magic. But Aryan was not a fool. When he secretly summoned the court sage, the same man who had once helped him research Rakshaka, the words he heard chilled him to the bone. It was not Vasundhara who was harmed. It was she who cast the fragrant soul summoning spell, a forbidden ritual meant to expel a soul from its body. But she was struck by backlash. Aryan gripped his sword's hilt. His heart twisted in confusion and rage. The woman he had trusted, the queen he had shared his throne with, had brought black sorcery into his court. And the target had been Ujjala. That night, Ujjala dreamed again. But this time, there was no cursed incense. No sorceress. Only a vast lotus field under the moonlight. And a woman in white, holding a prayer bead strand. Do you remember me, Ujjala? The woman asked, her voice like morning mist. She recognized her, Leela, the birth mother she had never known. The woman's voice was gentle. "My daughter, do not fear dreams. In dreams, you will see the truth. You are the light sown into the darkness. Not for one lifetime, but for many." The woman Vasundhara, she is the same soul who, in a past life, betrayed you when you were queen of an ancient kingdom. She was once your jealous handmaiden, who caused your untimely death. Ujjala stood frozen. "But why was I reborn in the forest?" she asked. Leela smiled. "It was your seed of karma. To reap a harvest of purity. To live among the beasts, to learn from the earth, to see with the heart, instead of the glitter of gold. If you had not fallen into the forest, you would never have been pure enough to break the old cycle." When Ujjala asked, "Then what must I do?" Leela's voice drifted away into the mist. "Forgive, before vengeance finds you." Ujjala woke, her forehead damp with sweat. But her heart was clearer than it had ever been. The next morning, Ujjala requested an audience with Aryan. In the hall where sunlight streamed through the trees, she knelt, offering a string of rough stone beads in her hands. "I humbly request permission to leave the palace for a time." Aryan was stunned. "Why? Has someone forced you?" Ujjala shook her head. "No one has forced me. But someone here is being consumed by the darkness within their own heart. If I stay, jealousy will fester into hatred. And if that happens, I will no longer be myself." Aryan remained silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and choked with emotion. "I have lost my father, my mother, my faith. If I lose you now, I do not know what will be left of my heart." Ujjala looked at him, without sorrow, without tears. "You will not lose me, your majesty. We only need to take one step back. To let the light find its way into the shadows once again." Ujjala left the palace in silence. No trumpets. No processions. No golden palanquin or flags. Only Bandari walking quietly by her side, her eyes full of unspoken worry. And Aryan, the king, standing at the top of the marble steps, gripping his sword hilt as if trying to hold onto something he could not name. Ujjala did not look back. Because if she did, her heart would not let her go. And if she did not leave, she would never be strong enough to return. After many days crossing forests, once familiar, now strangely foreign, she finally arrived at the old hermitage, her first home after abandonment. But the moment she set foot there, an eerie feeling swept over her. No birds sang. No leaves rustled. No smoke rose from the hearth. The entire forest seemed to be holding its breath. Ujjala pushed open the door. The hermitage was empty. The prayer bell hanging from the rafters had rusted. The straw mats were torn and moldy. The statue of Shiva lay toppled, covered in grey dust. There was no trace of Mahadeva. She called out, "Baba! Baba, I've returned." No answer. Only the echo of her voice dissolving into the emptiness. Bandari gave a low growl. She smelled something. Not human. Not beast. But the remnants of an invisible battle. Under the old Bodhi tree where Mahadeva once meditated, the earth had been violently churned. The soil was scorched black. And on the ancient trunk, a handprint, burned deep into the bark, remained. A hand not belonging to any mortal. In that moment, a cold wind swept through, making the trees shiver like a body stripped bare. Ujjala understood. Mahadeva had not simply left. He had been pulled into a trap, a spiritual snare, forged by a being burdened with deep karmic debts. That night, Ujjwala rekindled the fire in the abandoned hermitage. She sat cross-legged before the fallen Shiva statue, hands in prayer, chanting ancient mantras. Her voice rang out into the darkness. Not loud, not soft. But each word fell like a drum beat upon the hidden realms of the earth. By midnight, the wind died. The ground trembled slightly. And from behind the hermitage, a soft bell chimed, a sound not of this world. She opened her eyes. Behind her, a figure appeared in the faint light. Not Mahadeva, but a boy, hair as white as snow, eyes as red as embers. He looked as if he had lived 1,000 years yet still bore the face of a child. He spoke, his voice flowing like wind through leaves. You are Ujjwala, the one who escaped the cycle of rebirth once, but has not yet paid your full debt. You have returned seeking your spiritual father. But you must go farther, into a place where light cannot reach. Ujjwala whispered. Who are you? I am the gatekeeper. A soul suspended between cause and consequence. The guardian of those who have yet to fulfill their vows. Mahadeva was pulled into the threshold realms. Because he stood against the dark force that sought to corrupt your flesh on the night of the cursed fire. Ujjwala clenched her fists. How can I save him? The boy reached out and parted the air. A doorway of ash appeared, inscribed with ancient Sanskrit. Bhavadvara, the doorway between lives. If you dare to pass through, he said, you will face your true self, reflected in the mirror of karma. If your heart remains pure, you may pull him back. But beware, those not strong enough will be trapped forever, becoming part of the forgotten. Bandari shrieked softly. She knew that place was not meant for the living. Ujjwala knelt beside her, stroking her soft cheek. If I do not return, you must go back to the palace. It will be safer there. But Bandari cried louder, pulling at her clothes. The gatekeeper said calmly, the maternal bond born of selflessness cannot be severed by mere will. If she chooses to go with you, nothing will stop her. But remember, walking alone is meditation. Walking with love is sacrifice. Ujjwala drew a deep breath, then stepped into the ash doorway. Bandari leapt after her without hesitation. The door closed silently behind them. Before them lay a realm without day or night. Only memories, fears, and karmic debts yet unpaid. The moment the ash door shut behind them, the light vanished. Ujjwala and Bandari fell into a void. No gravity. No color. No sound. Only the chilling cold reaching deep into their souls. Here, time did not exist. No before. No after. Only the raw, eternal present, like an unhealed scar ripped open. Far away, a faint thread of white light shimmered, like a spider's silk guiding them through the darkness. Each step Ujjwala took, her heart grew heavier, as if she carried 1,000 whispering voices inside her mind. Betrayal. Forgiveness. You once fled. You once killed for love. Bandari clutched her sleeve, her tiny hand trembling. Ujjwala squeezed it tightly and whispered, we will not turn back, mother. Not this time. Fog at the end of the path, a giant mirror appeared. Floating in the void, towering like a mountain. Its surface made of thousands of broken shards. Each shard. A lifetime. A voice echoed, ancient, beyond gender, beyond time. If you wish to save Mahadeva, you must walk through yourself. Ujjwala stepped forward. As her hand touched the mirror's surface, the first vision appeared. One, the first life, the betraying woman. Ujjwala saw herself in the form of a proud consort, living in a distant, decadent court where everything glittered on the surface but rotted underneath. In that life, she had betrayed the emperor, offering her soul to a sorcerer in exchange for the power of immortality. But the price was the death of the man who had truly loved her. Ujjwala collapsed to her knees. The mirror shattered into ash. And the pain of once being the betrayer tightened its grip around her heart. Human beings are not merely victims, she thought. I, too, was once the cause of pain. To the second life, the child burned alive. Another shard of the mirror lit up. Ujjwala saw herself as a little girl in a village torched by marauding soldiers. She was tied to a stake alongside her mother, burned alive. In the final moment, the child had screamed just one word. I forgive. Ujjwala wept. I was once the one who caused suffering, and once the one who suffered it. Karma spares no one. Rebirth only delays, but never erases it. 3. The third life, the nun who abandoned her robes for love. Another life unfolded. She was a nun who had kept her vows for 10 long years. But one day while begging for alms, she met a young man whose eyes churned like a stormy sea. They fell in love. She abandoned her saffron robes. But to him, she was nothing more than a passing amusement. Broken-hearted, she ended her life by the cold river. Ujjwala gazed into the mirror, without flinching. I was foolish, she thought. But that suffering, I do not regret. Because from it, I learned never to betray myself again. The mirror cracked. Having passed through 3 shards, the colossal mirror dissolved completely, revealing a radiant path paved with burning pink lotuses. Bandari looked at her, no longer with fear, but with reverence. And at the end of that shining path, Mahadeva sat in deep meditation, bound by thousands of black threads. Each thread was a curse, a grudge, an unresolved karmic burden from countless lives. His eyes were closed, his skin pale, but a faint golden glow still shimmered around him. Ujjwala knelt before her spiritual father. I cannot pray to the gods, she whispered. But I offer all the truth in my heart. She began to chant. Not a mantra Mahadeva had taught her, but one rising from deep within herself. As if her soul had once been that of a great spiritual master in a life long past. The chant resonated. One by one, the black threads exploded into ash. Mahadeva opened his eyes. And what he saw was not a naive girl, nor a frightened child, but a light that had seen itself through the endless cycles of life and death. Mahadeva smiled gently. You have gone farther than your teacher. The Bhavadvara doorway opened once more. Together, Ujjwala, Bandari, and Mahadeva stepped out of the void, back into the living forest. The sky above burst into the first light of dawn. Returning to Devgarha. When Ujjwala returned to the palace of Devgarha, the walls were the same, adorned with images of gods, warriors, and lotus flowers. But the hearts of its people had changed. Behind every tapestry, behind every painted pillar, the courtiers now whispered about the girl who once lived as a forest child, and now stood as a symbol of something they could not name. A light that had survived everything. Aryan came to greet her himself. Not with fanfare, not with soldiers, but with the lightness of a man who had found a lost piece of his soul. When he saw Mahadeva, Aryan knelt down in awe. You are the sage I had only ever read about in the scriptures. To see you with my own eyes, my life is fulfilled. Mahadeva smiled. Fulfillment is not granted by others' presence, but by the light of your own heart. Aryan turned to Ujjala, taking her hand gently. You have changed. You are no longer the bewildered girl from the forest. Ujjala nodded. I am still myself. But now, I have met every part of me I once tried to deny. The tribunal. The next day, a rare assembly was held in the royal court. Not for war. Not for coronation. But for Ujjala, to face Vasundhara before the gathered court. The queen walked in. Still beautiful, still regal. But her face was ashen, her spirit hollow. She looked at Ujjala. Not with jealousy, but with the eyes of one who had already lost. Aryan stood between them, his voice firm. Vasundhara, you used black magic against Ujjala. You violated the laws of the heavens, the laws of man, and the laws of the court. By decree, you deserve exile from the royal palace. The court fell silent. All awaited Ujjala's decision, for Aryan had yielded the choice to her. Ujjala rose. Sunlight from the dome above bathed her face. In that moment, she seemed not mortal, but like a bodhisattva standing in the royal court. She spoke. I once lived among the forests, where only beasts and gods were my companions. There, I learned a truth. No one is born evil. Sometimes, they simply let the pain in their hearts lead them, instead of compassion. She turned to Vasundhara and said clearly, you once sought to kill me. But I will not choose vengeance. If I repay hatred with hatred, then the light within me would be nothing but a shell. And inside, I would still be darkness. The court was stunned. Aryan's eyes filled with tears. Mahadeva smiled, as if seeing the white lotus he had once planted finally bloom. Bandari, standing proudly near the throne, patted her own chest, as if bursting with pride. Ujjala turned to Aryan. I do not ask for the queen's pardon. Nor do I ask for her punishment. I only ask. Let her live somewhere she might find herself again. In a monastery, in a quiet land. Aryan nodded. The decree was given. Vasundhara wept. Not from defeat, but because, for the first time, she had seen someone who had the power to destroy her, yet chose to save her instead. A few years later, in a lotus garden near the borders of Devgarh, there stood a humble school for orphaned children. The one who taught there was none other than Vasundhara, now known as the spiritual teacher Vasumti, her hair silver, her robe plain blue, her presence serene, as if she had never lived among golden palaces and marble halls. And what of Ujjala? She still lived beside Aryan, but not as a queen who ruled from a throne. Each morning, she chanted sacred verses with Mahadeva, taught children how to read and write, walked with Bandari into the gardens to gather flowers, and lit lanterns for those who had once lost their way. One day, a small child asked her, Mother Ujjala, if people abandoned you again, would you be hurt? Ujjala smiled gently and patted the child's head. If they left me in the forest again, I would grow with the wind. And if they abandoned me in darkness, I would become the light. At the end of the story, Ujjala sat by the lotus pond, her hand resting on the back of Bandari, now old and grey. A dream from long ago returned. A crying child alone in the forest. But this time, the child was no longer alone. Because beside her, there would always be a monkey mother. And an undying light. Thank you for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and share one thing this story taught you, and how you'll carry it into your life. Your voice matters. Reading your reflections brings strength, healing, and inspiration to us all. If this story moved your heart, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue crafting stories that awaken the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.